So the body has many different microbiomes all throughout. Um, there are microbes in your gut, in your stomach, and so the microbes in your stomach have a number of ways of communicating with the microbes in your brain. And so it's said that we have an entire brain in our stomach that's controlled by microbes. We have a microbiome in our alimentary canal, so mouth, throat, esophagus, which can help control digestion. We have microbiomes in our nasal canals, and women have a very interesting microbiome in their vaginal and uterine canals. In fact, when a baby is first born, this is the first source of biological, of the way of getting microbes for a child. The one we're going to focus on the most today is the skin. So the skin microbiome is exceptionally important. It is the first thing that your body responds to when you first enter a room. Because when you enter a room, there's all sorts of environmental, things that are going on. There's temperature, there's moisture. It could be a very humid room, and so there could be different microbes floating in the air. And so your microbiome on your skin first responds when you enter a new place. And that's really important to know, because your skin microbiome is really the barrier from you onto the world. And so what you're feeling in many ways is the effect of responses of your microbiome communicating with the host. Because everything is covered in a thin film of bacteria that helps to control interactions. And so the microbiome is a very big area of research right now. This page is just a Google search I did a couple months ago for microbiome news. And it seems like every week more stories come out about the microbiome and its various roles it plays in the host's overall health. So when do we acquire our microbiomes? And there is actually a very small mistake on this slide that I'm going to correct. Now, when one is first born, is the site of most of their early microbes. And for a very long time, it was thought that the microbiome gradually developed. And so the more one lived, the more microbes that gradually came up. But recent research from the Lieberman lab says that the number of microbes you get grow in infancy and then kind of stay stable during childhood and adolescence, and then shoot up again as a teenager. And then once the microbiome has been established, a human gets about one new microbe every single year living on their skin. And so acquisition of a normal microbiome has been linked to a normal adolescent development. But dysbiosis of the microbiome, in other words, microbes that aren't able to colonize, and a lot of microbe interactions on the skin, have led to some significant health detriments, including altered immune system. So a child may be more sick if their microbiome is imbalanced. Likewise, if one's microbiome is altered in their stomach, it can lead to disruption of their normal metabolism. So they may not be able to eat and digest food as well as others. And so there's a number of different areas of research right now that are looking into specific connections between a healthy microbiome and a number of different means of health. So images. So the more that comes out, the more we realize that the microbiome is really important. And it's also important to know that the bacteria that live on and in us are mostly harmless and in fact quite beneficial. And so right now, microbes are definitely the worst side of them. We can see what happens when certain microbes spread. Virus isn't quite a microbe. A virus is a non-living organism, and I believe Friday has tweeted some of the work I've done about viruses and their state. But small microbes like viruses and bacteria have been shown to be incredibly important for a number of different reasons. And so I think that a lot of people right now think of bacteria as all bad, but as it turns out, without them, we couldn't survive. We really need them. And so I'm gonna take screen sharing off for just a second. So are there any Avengers fans out there? I'm a huge fan of Avengers, any of the Marvel movies. And so I looked this up, and it seems that Avengers Endgame and Infinity War made quite a bit of money in Nigeria. So, so I want to put this in here that there's an institution in the U.S. called the Smithsonian, and the Smithsonian asked one of their doctors what would happen if we lost a portion of our microbiome. And so in the Avengers, the main villain, Thanos, snapped his fingers, and then suddenly all life on Earth, half of all life in the universe, was eliminated. And so when I was watching that movie, I thought that would be weird. What would happen if we lost half our microbiome? If suddenly someone snapped their fingers and half of all the microbes that lived on and in us were gone. And as it turns out, it wouldn't be great. If we were to lose our microbiome, what would end up happening was we would lose the ability to digest complex plant material. So things like lettuces and most vegetables, our bodies couldn't break down anymore. And if we're unable to get those nutrients, then that's it. And so if our microbiomes were to suddenly disappear or reduce by even half, it's conceivable that all life on Earth, or at least advanced life on Earth, would probably become extinct within 3 months. So our microbiomes are exceptionally important, as are the various viruses and fungi that live on our skin. So I'm gonna just pause for just a second. Does anyone have any questions before I move on to talk about some of the population's biology within the microbiome? And if you do have questions, please either type them in the chat or feel free to ask or just physically raise their hand. All right, so let's continue. So we're going to go more in depth on this, but I just want to introduce some of the basics of ecology and populations biology regarding interactions in the microbiome. So every single ecosystem has living or biotic components and non-living abiotic components that help to control what goes on in an ecosystem. And so if we look at this highly realistic image of a ocean, we see that there are a number of abiotic components. We have clouds and rocks. We have the water itself. And sunlight somewhere in there. We have abiotic components, so we have biotic components as well, the living organisms that live there. I'm gonna do those in red. So we got fish, we got birds, we got all sorts of animals here. And so in an ecosystem, it is these abiotic components that help to control what biotic components live there. So it makes sense that if there's not a lot of sunlight, you'd probably, the ecosystem would probably select for plants that are able to grow in reasonably low light. And so an ecosystem is said to have a carrying capacity. And so that basically just says that there's only so many resources to be able to survive to provide for so much life. For example, the Earth's carrying capacity is said to be about for 10 billion humans. So about 10 billion humans could potentially fit on Earth according to estimates from biologists. And so not every ecosystem is able to sustain as much life. You tend to find less larger, more complex life in deserts than you do in rainforests. And many different things go into that. Usually water seems to be the main indication. And so likewise, our own microbiomes have a carrying capacity as well. A host can only have so many microbes on it. And so whenever you think about the microbiome, everything that goes on in a larger ecosystem goes on your skin and in other similar microbiomes. And likewise, in a larger ecosystem, there's always relationships. And so if we look at what relationships exist in this idealized ecosystem, we see that there's dolphins who are probably eating the fish. There are lampreys that are probably eating other fish. These whales are probably eating the bigger fish. Orcas are probably eating them. And so we see a number of different predator-prey relationships that are happening. We also see beneficial relationships as well. This clownfish is able to live inside of these sea anemone, providing the anemone provides shelter for the clownfish, and the clownfish give food to the anemone. So an ecosystem is made up of countless tiny interactions that together give the full breadth of the complexity of an ecosystem. And so for our skin microbiomes, oh, not yet. And so likewise, every ecosystem can become disrupted. And so if suddenly large predators were to disappear, it would throw off the balance of the entire ecosystem. And so if large animals did, if small animals were suddenly gone, if plants disappeared, this ecosystem would be thrown completely out of balance. As you probably learned, plants form the bottom of a food pyramid with primary consumers and secondary consumers on top of that. And so every single ecosystem has these super complex interactions that together dictate the general rules. And so likewise, every ecosystem needs biodiversity. And so it's been, scientists almost universally agree that more biodiversity leads to healthier ecosystems, that the more stuff you have living there, the more chances that microbes have to create relationships and sort of find their place in the circle of life and where they are best designed to be. And so our skin microbiome is no different. If we look at the relationships within our skin microbiome, we see that the same general principles that dictate larger ecosystems dictate the small world. And so much of what we see, in fact, pretty much all of it in a larger ecosystem is replicated on our own skins and our own bodies. So now that we've talked about the relationships within a larger ecosystem, let's look at the relationships within the skin microbiome and how microbes exist on our skin and how they help protect us from harmful bacteria, as well as help to establish health in the host. Before I do that, are there any questions I can answer? Where we go? All right, so let's continue. And if you do have questions, just feel free. There's a chat window. I believe, yeah, there's a chat window where you can send me messages or send group messages. So if you don't feel like sharing, definitely write down, because I do want to get to all of your questions. So when we discuss the skin microbiome, we have to think about natural selection. So this idea that the strongest and microbes that are best able to survive in a given place will survive. And so what dictates that? The environment themselves. And so the environment is able to select for microbes. So when we look down at our skin, we think, oh, it's skin. What's the difference between right over here and right over here? On our foreheads? Is there a difference between what's above one eyebrow and maybe what's right in between our eyebrows. And as it turns out, it could be very, very different. Our skin is a variable ecosystem, so it differs a little bit in every single location. We have capillaries that cover virtually every millimeter of our body, and so the blood flow on one part of our skin may be a little different than the other one. And so if there's more blood flow to one area, then there's probably more nutrients. There's more oxygen, more glucose, more exposure to the sun. And so the difference between, let's say, our forehead and the bottom of our foot could result in incredible differences between the types of microbes that are selected to grow there. And as it turns out, if we look at all of the microbes in different parts of our body, we see that our own bodies are many different worlds to a tiny little microbe. And so if our skin is their world, how often does the microbe's environment change? And as it turns out, every time we go into a new room, there are slight changes that occur in the microbiome. And I began this talk by discussing the how our microbiome is a second skin to the world. And this is one way we see it, how our own skin has a whole bunch of different places where different microbes can live and thrive. And so this next part of the talk is going to be discussing the various relationships that happen between those microbes. So for microbes, for us, there are a number of different ways that humans pick up new environmental sources. So living in different areas with different temperatures can certainly select for slightly different microbes. And so studies have been shown that show that those living in a certain area tend to have comparable microbiomes, and those living in different areas tend to be different. And when I say different and similar, I'm not necessarily talking about species. For the most part, everyone has 4 or 5 major species of microbes that are living on our skin. But the tricky thing with microbes is that it may be one species, but there could be 1,000 different strains of it. And so we all have let's say, there's one bacteria that lives in our skin called Cutibacterium acnes, or C. acnes for short. And while every single human on Earth has this particular species, the strain and types of this species can vary widely from place to place and person to person. In fact, a microbe that is harmless on one person may be harmful on another, or beneficial. And so one's own individual biology can select for those strains that tend to be more beneficial. And so otherwise, other things that dictate our own what microbes live on us are what we our skincare routine. So like, how often do you wash your face? How often do you touch your face? Do you swim in lakes? Do you swim in an ocean? Do you not swim at all? Do you swim in swimming pools? What's your diet? Do you make a lot of phone calls, or do you text? And so there are so many different ways that your body can pick up new microbes, and most of them don't stick, but one microbe every year tends to get taken up by the microbiome. And so when someone is going through the world with their established microbiome, there's constant new threats or benefits to the host picking up new microbes. And so in order for a microbe to survive in the microbiome, it's very much a delicate balance. What happens if it grows too fast? If it grows too fast, then, well, on our own skin, if we have bacteria that starts breaking out, then our own immune system will be alerted. That's not great. Other bacteria may notice that this one bacteria is growing really fast, so that's not great either. And so the best microbes are ones that are able to survive silently, ones that we don't know are there. And if it grows too fast, then, well, it might not be able to grow in secret. What happens if it grows too slow? Well, what happens if a microbe doesn't eat enough? It probably won't be able to survive. And so likewise, if a microbe is too reliant on its host, that alerts the immune system. And no bacteria wants to have to fight the human immune system. For the most part, it is a very strong force against them. And so a microbe has to consciously choose how much to grow versus how much to stay hidden. And so what threats do microbes honor? Oh, Friday, did you raise your hand?
Yeah, Mr. Mike, I have a question.
Yeah.
Okay, you talked about the microbe on one person might be harmful on one person, and on the other it might be beneficial. Why is that? Is it because of the skincare routine and all that you talked about?
It is so many things and more. So science isn't entirely sure about that yet. I think I talk about that. Yeah. I talk about that on the next slide a little bit more. But for the most part, so to give you an example, this bacterium I mentioned before that's on the skin, Cutibacterium acnes or C. acnes. There's a skin condition called acne, and it manifests itself by pimples, bumps on the skin, lesions, edemas, eczemas. And so this microbe, acne, was named after C. acnes, thinking, oh, this is the microbe that causes acne, but not so fast. A strain that causes acne on one person may not necessarily cause acne on another. And one hot area of microbiome research right now is to try to figure out what exactly on a host makes certain pathogenic bacteria be able to grow versus others not. And so on the next slide, I'm going to talk about that a little more as to how a bacteria selects its host. But does that answer your question for now?
Yeah, Mr. Mike.
Cool. So let's say in the center, we have this microbe that is telling everyone that it's all over the place. And so the number of the stimuli that this bacteria must endure, it has to survive acne treatments and skincare. It has to survive the human immune system. Other microbes that want the same resources, that C. acnes microbe, that it feeds on an oil in our skin cells called sebum. And other microbes want that too. And so other microbes are going to try to get those resources. Likewise, our skin is covered with these bacteriophage viruses. And so these are not here for us, they're here for our microbiomes, the bacteria in our microbiomes. And so bacteriophages are actually probably the most common thing on our skin because they primarily infect bacteria. In fact, without these bacteriophage viruses, chances are our entire planet would be one big bacterial petri dish. And so viruses in our microbiome help control that. In fact, there is an entire microbiome called the virome that describes all of the viruses that are living on and in us. These are very much beneficial, and we couldn't survive without them because they do provide a check on the bacteria and some of the other small microbes on our skin. And so viruses are, and so most viruses are necessary for life. And in fact, scientists are pretty much in universal agreement that without viruses and without DNA from viruses, chances are life couldn't happen. In fact, viral DNA that was donated to us billions of years ago, we use that DNA to make an for women to make an umbilical cord from baby to mother. And so without viral DNA, we wouldn't have a lot of DNA that we use for early embryonic development, but that's for another talk. And so how do microbes colonize a host? So when a microbe lands on skin, it has this one way it's able to suddenly adapt is by doing something called hypermutation. And hypermutating is kind of what it sounds. The bacteria colony basically starts mutating certain genes for cell membrane carbohydrates as well as oxygen sensitivity. Why these two genes? They allow the microbe to hide. And so a microbe does not want to be spotted by a host for many different reasons. Namely, it'll probably be killed. And so by bacteria starting to randomly mutate key genes to hide, what ends up happening is most of the bacteria are killed. Some of those mutations are instantly kill it. Others, may. Is there a question? Oh. Other microbes. So mutation. Yes. So now you might think, well, why would a microbe start mutating? Well, it's honestly kind of silly for one microbe to do it, but it's important to remember that when there's one microbiome, there's probably a billion of them. And so the hope is that one of these mutations that are introduced will end up being beneficial to this microbe being able to survive. And so this has been studied a lot in hospitals for cystic fibrosis patients. Cystic fibrosis is a disease that is caused by bacteria and causes a compromised immune, and is one thing that cystic fibrosis results in is a compromised immune system. So an immune system that is more susceptible to attacks by bacteria. In fact, what we see in cystic fibrosis patients is in this graph, where over time we see that gradually this green represents the portion of one particular strain of microbes as it colonizes cystic fibrosis, and over time we see that these microbes start to go down, but then they start going up and shoot back up. And at the end of 16 weeks, 100% of all microbes are this one particular strain of microbe, and that is due to hypermutation. We can assume that somewhere around somewhere around week 12, we see that it starts, the mutation introduced starts benefiting, and by 16, everything is this one strain. And so in other words, the bacteria is now fully colonized the host. Now, is this colonization forever? Probably not. The downside of this is that if the immune system starts attacking, all of these clones will be killed instantly. And so a microbiome, so the idea is when hypermutation happens, that the microbes have to somehow stay as quiet and silent as possible when they find that one mutation that works. So similarly, this is from the same paper on cystic fibrosis, that we see that if these green cells represent no adaptive mutations. So in other words, these are cells that are just there, they haven't adapted, they just colonized. But there's in red in the second picture, you see mutators, and that is denoted by these circles with frayed edges. And so if we look over time, what we notice is that gradually all of the green non-adaptive mutations are dying off. We also see some of the non-mutators dying off. But gradually, we see at the very end, the only ones that are able to survive are those in red that are able to survive the host. And so a microbe is able to use hypermutation as a means to find the magic trick to see like what specific genes are required to be able to survive on a host. And so how does a host select for its own microbes? Well, I don't know about you, but I don't like being sick by microbe infections. And when a microbe lands on me that makes me sick, my immune system goes and attacks it all. And then that microbe is gone forever. And so the host's own immunity is probably the number one predictor as to whether or not a microbe is able to survive. So we see that in this image from a microbiology paper from 2013, that it's a really great review of just general of much of what I'm talking about today. But we see that detrimental microbes, so predator-prey, ones where the microbe or host are injured, and one where there's too much, and relationships where there's too much competition. Well, these are the relationships that can't survive in the microbiome just because it's really stressful. If you were a microbe, would you want to survive in a place where you were constantly getting injured or have to compete? It's very difficult for a microbe. And so the microbes in our microbiome tend not to stick around if they're a detrimental relationship. Whereas the host, if a microbe lands and it either both benefit from it, so the microbe gets food, humans might get some, sometimes a microbe in the microbiome can help defend against some of these detrimental ones. So those tend to be the ones that stick. Likewise, if a microbe lands and is silent and is just like there, it's getting resources from us and we're not noticing, then those are the ones that tend to stick around. So what determines whether or not a microbe can colonize a host? Mostly whether or not the host benefits or doesn't notice it's there. So pause there. Questions on anything I talked about regarding those the host microbe relationships? All right, one last part, discussing, oh, yeah, one last piece, and then gonna open the floor up to any questions folks may have on this. I should caution, I am not an expert on virology. I can answer basic virology questions, but I am a cell biologist and molecular biologist, and so my thing tends to be microbes in nature, less disease and epidemiology. But the last thing I'll talk about is whenever microbiomes are studied, we look at three different kinds of biodiversity to determine the health of a host. So they are called alpha diversity, beta diversity, and gamma diversity. And so alpha diversity describes all of the species living in a local area. So this alpha diversity would be all the microbes that are in the forehead microbiome or the gut microbiome. Beta diversity describes the ratio of local sites to local sites. So how do the microbes on our forehead compare to the microbes in our gut? What do they have in common? What strains do they have in common? Likewise, gamma diversity describes all of the microbes living in a region. And so this would be the sum total of all elements of alpha and beta diversity. And so phenotypically speaking, there's a number of different reasons this is important. If there are certain microbes that have to be all throughout our body, they play important roles in allergies and food sensitivity, whereas you might have one microbe in one area that has a unique role in just that spot. And so when we look at all of the various microbes that are living on and in us, it's important to remember that they are as wide and varied as our world is, because to a microbe, we are their world. And I like to think of it as this beautiful second skin, that we have this covering on us, and the microbes in our microbiome that are there forever deeply care about us, because if we go away, they lose their home. And so that's one thing I want people to know about their microbiomes, is that these are microbes that are very much interested in our well-being and survival, and keeping them happy is of paramount importance, because if disruptions in the microbiome can occur, it can lead to a whole bunch of really bad negative consequences, a number of diseases and conditions that can stick around. In fact, celiac disease. So gluten is the protein part of wheat, and right now in America and I think Britain and Italy too, there's a lot of people are having digestive problems regarding gluten. And one reason why these people suddenly can't eat bread and pasta is because their microbes in their stomach are basically rejecting the food. Because microbes in our stomach communicate with microbes in our brain in order to say, hey, yeah, you're full, or this food's good, eat more of this. And so our gut brain is exceptionally important in helping to control what we like to eat on a daily basis. And so I hope that this introduced you to some of the relationships and natural laws that dictate how we get our microbiome. And I'm happy to answer questions about this or what I talked about today. So does anyone have any questions? All right. Oh yeah, Friday.
I have a question. Okay.
Oh. Whoever was just talking is muted.
Sorry, can you unmute yourself?
There we go. Okay.
Raphael, can you unmute yourself? Raphael, unmute yourself so that you can ask your question before I ask mine.
Okay. My question is that, you hearing me? You got me? Okay, my question is that, you say the microbes lives in bodies of human beings in adolescent stage. So before the adolescent stage, and then is it that we obtain them from our environment? You say we obtain them from our environment, but what of those ones that are going to our elementary canal, the guts, and the nasals? Are we too having them from the environment?
So how I think I heard, how do the microbes sort of get into there and colonize? And so when we go into a new space, we're basically being flooded with microbes that are living in the air. Plus, everyone pretty touches their faces, and so microbes also know where to go somehow. And so when a microbe travels, when it gets on skin, it may get sucked into the nose, and the microbe may discover, oh, this is a good place for me to live. And so it's a matter of kind of luck. Since microbes are so small, where they land and where they end up is very much like, can I survive here? Just imagine that you are a seed that travels via the wind. You're small, and where you end up is very much due to chance. And so where these microbes end up is partially due to chance. And when they land in a certain region, or they get transferred to a certain region, if they're able to survive there, if the resources are beneficial, then it will grow. And so over time, and I mean like over the last several 100,000 years of human development, microbes have evolved right along with us. In fact, our own evolutionary history matches very much that of microbes. For example, most enzymes in microbes break down at about 105 degrees Fahrenheit, or about 42 degrees Celsius. Likewise, our own enzymes in our body start breaking down at 42 degrees Celsius. And so microbes have sort of been with us really since the beginning, and I mean the beginning. Everything came from on this planet from single-celled organisms. And so over the last few billion years, microbes have gotten really good at getting into places it can survive. In fact, in the last 20 years, we're learning just how microbes have been able to spread inside of our bodies, and how it's a good thing. It's 15 years ago, it was thought that the uterus where babies grow is a sterile cavity, that no microbes grow there. As it turns out, no, there is a microbiome there, and it's extremely important for the baby's overall health and well-being. And so microbes do have this amazing ability to be able to kind of spread, get everywhere, decide if the resources are right, or rather determine if the resources are right, and then if it's a good fit, that's it, it's there. Does that answer your question? Cool.
Very well.
Great. Other questions?
Okay, Mr. Mike. You spoke about viruses attacking bacteria on our skins. Like I've read somewhere about the lytic and the lysogenic cycles where viruses attack bacteria. So I want to understand, does this affect the microbiome on our skin or something? Does this have any symptoms or anything?
That's a good question. Well, I looked this up at one point. There are a few instances of our own viromes causing health problems, but it's not understood very well. So despite the fact that we know that we have a virome, there's not a lot known about it because viruses are really hard to study. They don't leave physical fossils. They mutate constantly, and once they're gone, if they don't infect, that it's impossible to find out exactly how they got there. And so the in regarding relationships, all we really know is that there's a bunch of bacteriophages. They attack bacteria. Sometimes they turn the bacteria into virus-making factories, and sometimes they don't. And you mentioned lysogenic. So lysogenic describes right after a virus implants its DNA, injects its DNA into the host, the DNA just sort of sits there. And we're seeing with COVID-19 right now that the DNA can take 2 weeks to activate. Sometimes it doesn't activate at all. And this is the weird thing about viruses, and something that science doesn't know about a heck of a lot about yet. We know that stress, lack of sleep, poor nutrition, like not a lot of time to rest could be what could indicate, give signals to the viral DNA that the host has experienced stress. And so any sort of trigger for metabolic stress tends to activate viruses, but not always. And so I think that doctors would be breathing a lot easier if they understood more about what exactly those signals are that trigger lysogenic to lytic. And I think science, and one area of microbiome research right now is to study the human virome. And viruses are very hard to culture, as in like it's hard to grow them outside of a host, since the resources they require from their host are so important. And so you can't just take a human microbiome and grow it on a petri dish easily, because you have to somehow replicate the exact conditions. And so I think the human virome is going to be a big area of research in the coming decades. But right now, there's not a lot known about it. So that was a long way of saying not sure.
So, Mr. Mike, can we say that actually we are half humans and half microbes?
I would probably more than that. So where's my annotation tools? Okay, I can't find my annotation tools, but so if we were to look at all of the human cells in our body, let's say they would be about here, and all the microbes cells in our body would be about here. And so we have, especially when you include viruses in there, we have way more microbes living on and in us than we do human cells, but they only amount for maybe 2 to 4 pounds. Not a lot of weight, because these are tiny. Just to appreciate the scale of size, imagine that you're outside a huge soccer stadium, and so you're a human looking up at the soccer stadium. That's kind of the scale of a bacteria and a human cell. Bacterial cells are tiny. And to imagine the viral scale, imagine a speck of dust next to a stadium, and that's a human cell versus a viral cell. And so, even though we are mostly microbes, they represent such a small amount of weight that it is it's staggering. Like there's a lot, but they're much smaller. So yeah, we're like 300% microbes, and we have some human cells in there too.
Thanks, Mr. Mike.
Are there other questions I can answer? All right. So I've been recording this lecture, and soon as we hop off, I'll turn this into a YouTube video, and I'll send this to you. And I can also share the slides I was presenting off of today. Would you appreciate those?
Yeah, Mr. Mike, thanks very much.
No problem. So if there are any, if any of you are watching this and have any questions that you want to ask, I am available on Twitter at, my handle is Michael Likes Bio. Just the 3 words, Michael Likes Bio. And so that is my Twitter handle. Thank you so much for having me here this morning to talk about microbes. I hope that you learned a lot, and I hope to hear from you as you have more questions.
Thank you, Mr. Mike.
You're welcome. Have a great day, everyone. Have a great rest of your day. Bye, everyone.
Yeah, really appreciate it. Thank you very much, sir.
My pleasure.
Thank you very much. Thank you very much.
You're welcome.
Thank you
Bye,
very much,
everyone.
sir.